What's going on, guys? And today is May 1st, and for us Marvel fans out there, it is now the day that could have been really great, but it's now really sad. This is actually like the saddest weekend in Marvel history. Well, actually, I don't really know, but I'm just guessing. But this day was supposed to be when Black Widow premiered in theaters. But because of everything that's happening out in the world right now, we gotta wait till November for that to come out. Another 6 months. I remember watching the trailers for that. It was very lit. It looked so cool. But now, we have nothing to look forward to. But on the bright side, since we've been stuck in here, it has given me more time to do stuff. And in fact, I finished my marathon on the Marvel Cinematic Universe on Tuesday, actually. But thing is, I was going to post a second video on, what was it, Thursday that I said. I did not post it because I had a lot of stuff in my mind, like some personal stuff, and also because I felt like I needed to figure out a way to make this video shorter, which I plan on doing in this video. So I'm not going to go over the second half of movies. That I'm going to consider the first part as as kind of a preview of the marathon. This is going to give you my official ranking as well as the other films that I've watched past Age of Ultron. And yeah, that's going to be exciting. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to give at least a minute long review for each movie that I'll be talking about from number 23 to number 1. And I'll be doing this all in one take because the editing's going to take a while, and also because I really need this video up as soon as possible. So anyway, let's just dive right on in because I want to make this video as short as possible because I know my last video, almost 45 minutes. Don't want that. So anyway, let's just get started. So I'm going to have the picture of the movie up here as well as the score down here. So just letting you all know. But anyway, let's get started with number 23, and that's going to be Thor the Dark World. Now, personally for me, Thor the Dark World, if I had to describe it in one word, it would be forgettable. I've already said this in my past Marvel video, but this movie just didn't really work for me. It was pretty boring and forgettable. Malekith was just a terrible villain, and honestly, the cast was very lukewarm in this movie. Even Loki was pretty lukewarm for me. And honestly, I mean, it's also kind of sad because this movie is supposed to be important with the Reality Stone, but it's just made into a pretty boring Earth space rom-com buddy comedy movie that basically involves dark elves that are not really intimidating. So, and if I were to score it, I'd give it a 5.1 actually out of 10. So next up at number 22 is Iron Man 3. Now this is actually my first MCU movie that I've watched, and after watching it for almost 7 years, I mean, it wasn't really that bad, but now this marathon for some reason literally shed some light on me, and now I do not like this movie as much as I did. The Mandarin twist especially did not work for me, not just because I did not read the Iron Man comics, but the twist itself in the movie just didn't work. The Mandarin was already an intimidating villain, and seriously, he was very threatening. He was going around shooting people, and there was a scene where he was shooting someone, but then later on he's just like, "Oh, I wouldn't go in there for 20 minutes or something," and it's just like, what? It was just a weird twist. And also, Aldrich Killian was a pretty bad character, which is sad because I like Guy Pearce, and also because it's not even an Iron Man movie. It's just a Robert Downey Jr. movie that features an Iron Man suit. And even when he's in the suits, he's not even in it at all. And he doesn't even defeat the villain. The villain's it's really Pepper that comes in and defeats him within 15 seconds. And it's very sad, really, because it's pretty disappointing. So I already give it a 5.3 out of 10. Next up at number 21, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This is a very unpopular opinion, but I guarantee you I'm going to have more unpopular opinions as we go. But Guardians 2 is probably the most disappointing movie in the MCU for me. Coming off the first Guardians, which we'll talk about later, it was literally just upsetting. Like, it took, basically for me, it took everything we love about the main characters and just did a full 180 on them right away. Star-Lord goes from being a likable space outlaw who lost his mother tragically to a whiny person who just wants a dad more than anything for some reason. I mean, yeah, we would all like to, if we did not get to see our dad, we would all want to see our dad. But seriously, in the last movie, he was just a carefree space outlaw, but now he's just whiny and just wants a dad for some reason, and he doesn't even know who he is. So there's that. Drax is meaner and is very mean and like really stupid in this movie, and it's very upsetting because Drax was actually really funny in the first movie. Baby Groot is there, but I think he has some really cute moments. But Rocket is just so bad in this movie. He just steals. He steals from the people they're trying to help out, and they turn into very, very, very crummy villains. However, I did love the Yondu part, but the one thing that really killed this movie for me was Kurt Russell. I mean, not that he was a bad character or anything. I just felt like Kurt Russell was severely wasted in this movie as a character. Like, he goes from being a fun dad that shows that he does care about Peter in a way, but like later on in the third act, it just shows like out of nowhere that he's a psycho, and he's killed a lot of his children, and he just wants to take over the universe, and it's just like, this was not built up in any way. But once again, I did like the Yondu stuff. His death is probably one of my favorites. It's probably one of the most emotional scenes in the MCU, and other than that, that was pretty much it for the movie. I'm sorry if I have it lower than what you guys have, but that's just my opinion, okay? Number 20, I gotta say, is the first Thor movie. Oh yeah, for Guardians 3, I forgot. I would give it a 6.4 out of 10. But yeah, the first Thor movie at number 20. Like, I've already said this in my first video. This movie, for me, it was supposed to be like the biggest step into the cosmic side of the MCU. But however, it's probably one of Marvel's biggest misfires for me. Like I talked about how the opening scene with Asgard hurt in my eyes. Thor comes off kind of a jerk in this movie, and he's just written inconsistently from now on. Like, he just goes from being a jerk to a humble person in just almost that, like a little over that, and then he's just like noble throughout the next Avengers movie. He's just so inconsistent. However, Loki does carry the movie for me. If Loki wasn't a great character or a great villain, this movie would probably be at the bottom 3 for me. Though I haven't even talked about the Dutch angles. I did in my last video, but the Dutch angles literally ruined the movie for me. Number 19, I would put with Iron Man 2. Iron Man 2 is also a disappointing movie. I mean, coming off of the first Iron Man movie, this movie practically has Iron Man action, but it's like, less of that, except it's more bloated with other storylines. Like, there's a storyline where Iron Man is having a body problem, like with his heart and his suit. He's fighting against the government, his relationship problem with Pepper and his dad, I would say. And there's also an Avengers and Thor setup, and that's like crammed into this movie as well. And it just doesn't really work. And also, like, the movie gets pretty boring in the middle when Whiplash is just sitting in a lab and just talking about drones are better or something like that. And literally, he's also a terrible character. Like, literally, the guy just comes off with Russian mumbling is literally all I hear from him. And his bird, and it's just, I just can't even stand it, really. And I'd give it a 6.9 out of 10. And for the first Thor movie, I mean, I have these shown it right here, but like, I keep forgetting. But I give the first Thor movie a 6.7 out of 10, and Iron Man 2 6.9. Next, we're going to transition to number 18, and that is The Incredible Hulk. Now, this is kind of where we transition to the movies where I don't like to I do like. Like, that's only 5 MCU movies that I don't like. that leaves the next 18 where I like them. The Incredible Hulk is not one of the best movies, but it's also not one of the worst either. I personally think it's a pretty enjoyable movie. I believe the villains are pretty good, except when Emil Blonsky goes full abomination. It already just starts the cliched element of the hero fighting a version of himself that has the same powers. But however, the fight scene with the Incredible Hulk and Abomination fighting each other was pretty cool. But there's not really much else you could say about this movie, considering that Edward Norton was replaced by Mark Ruffalo in Avengers, but which is pretty disappointing. But it's still a fun movie nonetheless. I would say I would give it a 7 out of 10. Excuse me. But yeah, we're gonna move to number 17, and you guys are gonna hate me for this, but number 17, I have Thor Ragnarok. Now, hear me out, guys. I know most of you in the comment section are going to love this movie. But for me, I'm not one of those people that loves this movie. I like it, but it's not one of my favorites. Let me just explain why. My main problem with this movie is its plot inconsistency for me. The premise tells us basically this is the destruction of Asgard. Thor has a sister that comes back. Odin doesn't tell him anything, but whatever. But this is supposed to be like the big apocalypse on Asgard. But instead we get like a comedy that basically cuts away all the drama and we're just left with comedy. Like when the Warriors 3 are killed off, it literally just shows no purpose really. Thor doesn't even react to it. In fact, Thor doesn't even react against Hela's attack on Asgard. He's just stuck on Sakaar the whole time in a buddy comedy with the Hulk. It just feels like we're watching two different movies. We're watching a movie about Asgard's destruction, and they're watching a movie about that's basically should be an SNL sketch with Thor and the Hulk beyond Sakaar with Jeff Goldblum as Grandmaster there. Also, this also pains me to say this, but the Doctor Strange scene that was in Thor Ragnarok, it was cool when you first see it, but as the movie progresses, it never gets brought up again. So that itself feels like a Saturday Night Live sketch for me. But I will say this, the movie does have great moments, like when Thor finds his true power. Asgard's not a place, it's a people. But ultimately, the movie doesn't really work for me, and the ending especially doesn't really help it much. Especially when Thanos' ship shows up, it literally just feels like this whole movie doesn't even matter. It was just all a joke, and literally they all died for nothing. Even though it did serve a great opening for Infinity War, and I would give it a 7.9 out of 10. But I'm really sorry, guys, if I made you guys just hate me. But that is just my opinion on Thor Ragnarok. I'm so sorry. Number 16, I believe we have Avengers Age of Ultron. I've talked about this last on my video. Sorry, it's moving. I gotta hold on to my phone quickly, but yeah. Avengers Age of Ultron, I personally enjoyed this movie for what it was. However, I did not like how there was a lot crammed into it at once. There was the whole movie is essentially the Avengers trying to take down Ultron. But there are also stuff where the Avengers are seeing basically different visions for themselves. And I'm personally thinking it's a bit much, honestly. And I would also say that Ultron was a good villain at first, but then as the movie kept going, he was getting a bit poor, and especially with his one-liners and a lot of his Pinocchio lines, there are no strings on me or something. It just, and it's, oh, for God's sake or something. Just literally didn't work for me, honestly. But I did like how this movie set up Civil War and a little bit of Infinity War. The Thor Ragnarok setup wasn't really much, but it was still okay nonetheless. I would give it an 8.1 out of 10. Next up in number 15, I have Captain America, the First Avenger. I personally enjoyed this origin story. Captain America is one of my favorite heroes and characters in the MCU. Steve Rogers, when he starts out in this movie, is already a great character. He wants to go serve his country, even though he's severely sick. He's a very sickly man, and and seriously, I just see him as a third grader with an adult man's head on it, but that's just CGI. I mean, it could look totally worse, but it's totally cool. But I do also like the character moments like that show Steve Rogers' character, or that he stays the way he is with a super soldier serum. They even say that in the movie, which I think is a great line. My main criticism of the movie was Red Skull, as I said in the last video. But however, in this rewatch, I've seen it twice. The first time I watched it, Red Skull was kind of an issue. Like, he just felt so cliched at that point. But when my second time watching it, he wasn't that much of an issue. But the movie was still great. I enjoyed it, but it just ended up being ranked that way, and I would give it an 8.2 out of 10. This is the problem of doing a one take. My throat starts to dry up a bit, but excuse me. We're just at number 14, and that is Doctor Strange. I personally like Doctor Strange. However, I'm going to start with my main criticism of it first. The first half of the movie is kind of boring a bit. Like, it basically opens Doctor Strange's story on, like, he starts out as a neurosurgeon and he gets into a car crash. Very relatable message for teens. Don't text and drive. It's why I don't text and drive in the first place. But, there's just that. But, like, when he tries to heal himself and when he's just acting like a jerk for no reason, it kind of doesn't really make the movie that much interesting, really. But I would say when he starts learning the powers of magic, and definitely the third act were definitely the best parts of the movie, because the third act has like so much magical effects added to it. The special effects in this movie are probably the best in the entire MCU, but the villains themselves were also kind of generic. But it was still a fun movie, but there's always room to improve on it. But it's not the best Marvel movie, but it's definitely one of the best looking, and also one of the more interesting to watch. And if I were to score it, I would give it an 8.3 out of 10. Next up at number 13, I have Guardians of the Galaxy. I swear, you guys are probably going to be more and more mad with me about this list as time goes on. But for me, Guardians of the Galaxy was a very fun space movie. I felt like it was a much better venture into space than the first Thor movie, but it was definitely a heck of a lot of fun. All the characters are quirky and very good, very awesome, until Guardians 2 came along and completely ruined almost all of them. So, okay, I should probably not say not ruined, but but at least kind of altered them in a way that I did not like it. But oh my gosh, I'm sorry. You guys are really going to be mad now, but I definitely enjoyed the characters in Guardians 1. I would definitely say Groot was my favorite, especially since he sacrificed himself, and it was very upset. It was very sad and emotional. But Star-Lord was also really great. Chris Pratt was a big standout in the movie. Heck, everyone was a standout. But except for Ronan, who was the villain of it. All I got off of him was that he was he likes to yell like at different points in time, and he's blue and he's very evil. But he was still a very formidable opponent for the Guardians once he got the Power Stone. I just wish that he was a better villain, but all in all, the movie was pretty fun. And watching it might actually be my most improved movie, because like I had it at an 8.4 the first time I watched it, but at watching it again, it definitely elevated for me up to an 8.7 as my score. But it's just how I ranked it that way. I wish it could be ranked higher, but it's just how I ranked it that way among my other films. Yeah. Alright, next up, we're at number 12. It is Ant-Man and the Wasp. For me, I know there's some people that don't love this movie, that don't like it because of its low stakes, and it comes after Infinity War, and it's pretty anticlimactic. Pun is not. I'm not going to confirm or deny that that pun was intended. But me personally, I would say it's one of the funniest movies in the MCU. It's one of the most fun movies in the MCU, and it's definitely the most lighthearted. The "Come On Get Happy" song that they play, like in the beginning and the end, literally literally make me feel happy during the whole movie. And Scott Lang's antics, once again with the puns, I literally just find myself with these puns when he's under house arrest, is really one of the most normal, relatable, and really fun things to watch in the movie, especially since we're now in quarantine and we can now relate to what he does under house arrest, surprisingly. But I will agree that how the movie is presented, like, it's this very, 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 very small scale MacGuffin story that literally spans about like 2 to 3 days. It's not really the biggest stakes, but overall it's still a very fun movie nonetheless. I would score an 8.7 out of 10. It's the same thing with the Guardians of the Galaxy, actually, surprisingly, which I found out. Maybe over time, maybe when I watch it again, it'll probably change, but I'll see what happens. But as of right now, it's tied with Guardians, though I personally think it's better because I like the humor in Ant-Man in the Ant-Man films better, especially since we get to our number 11 spot, which is the first Ant-Man. Now, what I really appreciate about the two Ant-Man movies is that they are very consistent in tone, humor, and most importantly, like the stakes. Both movies itself are pretty small scale, but they're still fun movies nonetheless. I mean, you could go into Ant-Man and still have a great time with it without having the whole world going to be being blown up or anything like that. Or since it was coming off of Age of Ultron, like having a city fall from the sky. But I would say like the cast of both Ant-Man films were cool. However, where this movie kind of prevails over Ant-Man and the Wasp is that the supporting cast is hilarious. Like Luis, who is Scott's or Ant-Man's best friend, with his storytelling, it's just so hilarious. It's awesome. However, I felt like in Ant-Man and the Wasp, they kind of undermined it a bit. It comes up, I think, twice, maybe once. I think. Maybe once, yeah. I think it only comes up one time, and it's just, and when it does come up though, it's really hilarious. Truth serum. I don't know what I was about to say there, but in the first Ant-Man, he just goes all out. It's just insane. But that's just kind of where Ant-Man kind of beats Ant-Man and the Wasp, even though Yellow Jacket was kind of a cliche. I don't know why I said kind of. He's very well a cliched Marvel villain, but it was still a fun film nonetheless. The final battle on the toy train was very hilarious, and Scott and Paul Rudd as Ant-Man is just one of the best castings in the MCU, honestly. And I personally can't wait for Ant-Man 3. I'm kind of hoping that it kind of goes a little bigger, but we'll just have to see what happens. But let's transition to our top 10, which, starting off my top 10, is Captain Marvel. Now, this movie is very divisive among Marvel fans, and I honestly cannot see it. This movie has people that love it. It also has its haters as well as its trolls. But personally, I had a fun time with Captain Marvel. This movie was very interesting for me. Like, the setting was very interesting. Taking place in the mid-90s, 1995. It's a very interesting setting. The space elements with it, with the Kree and the Skrulls, it was very cool, actually. And it had a bit of a Guardians of the Galaxy vibe, excuse me, to it. Especially with, like, they have this scene where they do space jumps like they do in Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's very cool that they do that. Even the Earth stuff is pretty cool. I would say the fish out of water humor in Captain Marvel is way funnier than in Thor. But I would say the best part of Captain Marvel is definitely Samuel L. Jackson and Brie Larson's chemistry with each other as they're going off with each other, like their banter back and forth, is just so fun to watch. And I would also say like the throwbacks to the MCU, like like elements from the MCU in this time period are cool. Like Coulson in this movie, although he's not featured prominently, it's still cool to see him. Ronan and Korath from Guardians, it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool to see them as well. However, they're not fleshed out. They're still generic villains, but which is kind of disappointing. But and I do not like some of the twists they do in this movie, like Nick Fury losing his eye. I didn't really enjoy that very much. The Avengers Initiative. I mean, I didn't hate it, but like first time I watched it in the theater, I literally had a WTF moment in there. But I would say that the Skrull twist, I feel like it was like the Mandarin twist in Iron Man 3, where it kind of came out of nowhere and it made no sense, but it wasn't horribly executed. I felt like it kind of made sense, but it also kind of not really, because earlier on in the movie we seen Skrulls just get killed for like left and right, and we're just supposed to expect them to be refugees now, and we're supposed to expect them to be innocent, but I don't know. But overall, I still enjoyed Captain Marvel. It was quite a great movie. I honestly can't wait for the sequel to come out on July 8th, 2022, and I were to score it, I would give it an 8.9 out of 10. From there, let's transition to number 9, which is the first origin story in the MCU, and that is Iron Man. Now, I love Iron Man. Watching the first movie was in the MCU is literally gives you a very interesting feeling, because it's what started this whole thing. And when you think about it, like when you watch Endgame, it like here's how I did it. Like after I watched Iron Man 3 Infinity War and had my time like watching MCU movies to catch up, I watched Iron Man. It was a very fun time. It was pretty old. I mean, it felt old. It's one of its weaker qualities, but it still holds up nonetheless. But when you watch Endgame, some of the moments in Iron Man really hit you, and when you go back to watch Iron Man, oh my gosh, it's so cool how the stuff that you see in Iron Man gets called back in Endgame, which we're going to talk about later. But it's just really amazing. Also, Robert Downey Jr. is probably one of the best casting in the MCU as Iron Man. And I would say like the cast in this movie is very well pointed, which is a thing that most Marvel movies do a great job on. And even the villain in this one, Ironmonger, he was really good. Jeff Bridges plays him well, but he does start the clichéness of being the evil version of the hero, but still, this movie does a great job setting up the Marvel Cinematic Universe today. And I would have to give it a 9.2 out of 10 because it's such a fun movie and it was a great start to this whole franchise. Now let's move to number 8 on another more recent origin story, Black Panther. Again, I like Black Panther. It is a very fun movie to watch. And I mean, it's also a very interesting movie because it also focuses on the cultural aspect of the African nation, and Wakanda is also just a very cool place to look at. But I would say the real standout of this movie is Michael B. Jordan, who plays Killmonger. Black Panther doesn't really get focused much on this movie, but he's still a cool character nonetheless. I would just say that Killmonger is the better villain. Black Panther gets a 9.2 out of 10 for me. The same score as Iron Man, though it's slightly better because the villain, Killmonger, is just more interesting, and the story is interesting, and the setting is very cool as well. And yeah, that's my take on Black Panther. Once again, I can't wait for the sequel, but we have to wait another 2 years at least, but we'll see what happens. Number 7, Spider-Man Homecoming. What I love about this movie is that, well, that's a bit far ahead. Spider-Man Homecoming is the second most relatable movie in the MCU for me. I'll get to my first one in a minute, but that's what I love about the Spider-Man movies in the MCU, is that they are very relatable. Me as a teenager, I could just see that stuff happening to me as a teenager. Tom Holland plays Peter Parker very well, and even the story of Homecoming is very interesting. I love how they tie other MCU events together in this movie. With the Vulture himself is great. Michael Keaton is amazing. And personally, I mean, I just love how this movie is tone wise for high schoolers. However, I don't find myself rewatching this movie a lot for some reason. It's probably because like some of the twists in there are like once you watch them the first time, it's like oh my gosh. But like you don't feel like going back to it. But it's still a fun movie nonetheless. And I would give it a 9.3 out of 10. Next, let's transition to number 6, Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Now, let me just say, I had this in my top 5, but it was recently surpassed in my marathon. I would say this movie is it's a bomb of a movie, and I mean it in a good way. Like this movie is like this movie just fires on all cylinders with the action and the story of Shield being compromised by Hydra. It's insane. And Captain America is just such a cool character in this movie. Like he fights really well. I mean, he already did fight pretty well, but the action scenes in this movie are just amazing. And even the villains in this movie, Alexander Pierce, like is very cool because of his corrupt government, because of the corrupt government aspect of it. Winter Soldier also is pretty cool, especially since it's Bucky who is Cap's friend from the first Avenger. And it also shows that there's some emotional stakes in there that Cap does not want to destroy Bucky. So I just love the aspect of it. However, what keeps this movie down for me is that some of the deaths that they fake in this movie kind of don't really come off as fake. I feel like a death in particular kind of should have stayed dead, but kind of should have been dead already, but whatever. We like the character, but if you haven't seen the movie, you should go watch it. Why haven't you seen the movie is a better question, but you know, that's just my opinion. I really love Winter Soldier. You could go watch my other video and to find out my full thoughts on it. Now let's go to our top 5. And starting at number 5, I forgot. Winter Soldier, I give it 9.4. It would already be down here, but that's just me saying it. But yeah, number 5, Spider-Man: Far From Home. Now, you guys can go ahead and tell me in the comments section, Logan, this movie is not the best Spider-Man movie ever. It literally has Peter getting glasses that has access to a weaponized system. And I'm just like, yeah, I know. But other than that, this movie is pretty fun. I feel like this movie has a lot of stuff that pretty much makes that whole storyline forgivable for me. I will say that the first half of the movie where they talk, I love the blip stuff where they talk about like the consequences of people being snapped away and then reappearing in Endgame in this movie. I love how they explain that. But I would say that this movie was kind of on the same range as Homecoming. But when Mysterio goes full blown Mysterio in this movie, it's a very amazing ride, and I just enjoy watching this movie from beginning to end. With the third act being one of my favorite third acts of the entire MCU. Also, Peter and MJ, or Tom Holland and Zendaya, are probably my second favorite romance in the MCU, right next to Cap and Peggy, but maybe higher, but I don't know. But it was still a fun movie. I can't wait for Spider-Man 3 because of the cliffhanger they left us on, as well as what Phase 4 has in store for us as well after this movie. But coming off of Endgame, it's kind of weird that this would be the last movie in Phase 3, but either way, still a fun movie. I enjoy it. Number 4, I'm going to have the first Avengers. Spider-Man: Far From Home gets a 9.5. I don't know why I keep forgetting, but the Avengers. I love Avengers. It brings all 6 of these heroes together, 4 of which have franchises, 2 of which appeared in like 2 of those franchises, and it's just so cool how they were able to bring all of them together. And Loki is such a great villain, and the action in this movie is great, and just all the heart that's in this movie is excuse me, is very, very well written. I mean, Avengers Age of Ultron probably took it a bit too far, but as we're going to talk about later, it goes really, really well, and as far as extreme as it goes, it's very awesome. And yeah, I just love how this first Avengers movie paved the way for what comes next to make it better than it was before. Which leads me to number three, which is Captain America: Civil War. This movie basically takes the Avengers movie, doubles it with two teams of Avengers. There's Team Cap and Team Iron Man, and just pulls them apart. It's just insane. The conflict that is between these two teams, also between Cap and Iron Man, it's just insane. You don't know who's right or wrong. Well, there really are no right or wrong answers in this, but personally, I'm Team Cap. I'm wearing a blue shirt for it, but yeah, it's also a very compelling argument. One could say that Iron Man is right, and another could say Cap is right. They wouldn't be right or wrong, unless I mean, the Marvel fan base could be a bit toxic, but once again, they're not right or wrong. But this movie does do a good job, like basically just tearing the universe apart, while also not going too far with it. But it's still a heck of a ride, and it does conclude the Captain America trilogy in a very, very insane way possible. And now we're just gonna jump through these next two. I mean, you could say that 2 and 1 finally are Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame tied. However, I have Infinity War separately at number 2 and Endgame separately at number 1. Let me just explain this quickly. Infinity War and Endgame, as far as people may think, they're the same story. Like, they're just a two-part story. I personally think there are two different movies. Everyone might think that, but for me, that's just how it is. Infinity War is one movie where Thanos acquires the stones. Endgame is another movie where the Avengers come out on top. And I personally think both movies do a great job at doing that. Infinity War does a great job at establishing how much of a threat Thanos is and how much the heroes got to stand up against him, defend the universe, and then they ultimately fail and Thanos comes out on top. Endgame does a great job at being the aftermath of that, while also the surviving heroes coming up with a plan to stop, trying to stop, like, well, not really stop at first, but like basically reverse things, but then they have to stop Thanos later on. And I think also what both movies do a great job at is the ensembleness, really. However, Infinity War has a lot of characters, and some of them get sidelined. However, they show up in the story in a way that makes sense. I forgot to mention about Civil War, how they've already got a big ensemble cast, but like one of my main issues was that Hawkeye, Ant-Man, and Spider-Man specifically, those three characters kind of joined the story a bit late. Black Panther joined the story. He fit in the story pretty well because he was actually at Vienna when it blew up, and he was a part of he's a prince of Wakanda, so he can show up with his dad, who is the king, but then he gets enraged because he thinks Bucky killed him. So he's Black Panther and he goes after him. However, Hawkeye, Ant-Man, and Spider-Man just showed up by Tony for no reason, just to be all like, hey, come to Germany with me and fight Cap. Cap just calls up Hawkeye off screen and tells him, yo, I need you to get over here and get Scarlet Witch and Ant-Man for me. And this Ant-Man guy that Falcon apparently knows. And then off screen they get Ant-Man, basically just drug him. Not really drug him, but give him a lot of coffee. But for me, it's just like, these characters really have no reason to be here other than Cap and Iron Man need them to be. But it still doesn't matter. The airport sequence is great. Infinity War has a lot more characters, but however, they do fit in the story that makes sense. But some of them don't really get much to do. However, what I think Endgame benefits from is that they have a smaller ensemble cast. Like, when you think about it, Infinity War had 20 main heroes. Endgame was cut down to like 10 to 11 heroes. Like at least 9 in the first act. And then when Captain Marvel goes away and they get the rest of the team, they get 10. They got 10 characters. It's just simplified that much. But then at the end of the final battle where everybody shows up, it's just insane. And also Endgame just has some of the best moments in cinema history. Like I say with the final battle, and especially when Cap picks up Thor's hammer and when Iron Man's death, it's just very touching moments. But that is personally my view on all the MCU films. Captain America Civil War gets a 9.6 for me at number 3. Infinity War gets a 9.8 as second spot. And Endgame gets a 9.9. I would give this a 10 out of 10, though Fat Thor was kind of frustrating for me, but other than that, it was still a fun movie. I enjoyed it nonetheless. And Endgame comes in at number 1 with a 9.9. So to list off my top 10 again, I mean, despite you guys probably being mad at me, and because we kind of got to wrap this up now, we got Captain Marvel at number 10, Iron Man at 9, Black Panther at 8, Spider-Man Homecoming at 7, Winter Soldier at 6, Spider-Man Far From Home at 5, The Avengers at number 4, Captain America Civil War at number 3, Infinity War at 2, and Endgame at number 1. That's my ranking of the MCU. Why don't you let me know down in the comments how wrong I am and how much you hate my ranking, but it's fine though. But also go ahead and comment down below what other suggestions of videos you might want to see me do. Don't forget to leave a like on the video to show your support. Also subscribe to the channel to get more content. And yeah, I'll catch you guys later. Please have a great day. Peace out. See you later. And bye-bye.